I was halfway through stacking firewood behind my cabin when I heard tires crunching up the gravel road, fast enough to throw dust clear across the ditch, and before I even turned around, I already knew who it was. Around Cedar Hollow Ridge, there was only one person who drove like the mountain belonged to her: Vanessa Holloway, president of the HOA and unofficial ruler of everybody else's business. She stepped out of a white Mercedes SUV wearing tall leather boots that had never seen mud a day in their life, carrying one of those oversized binders against her chest like she was walking into a courtroom instead of somebody else's property. "Ethan Mercer," she called out before I even reached the driveway. "We need to discuss Saturday." Right there, my blood pressure went up a little. Anybody who starts a conversation with "we need to discuss" usually means they already made the decision without you. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward her slow and steady, because people like Vanessa loved reactions, they fed on them. "What about Saturday?" I asked. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile somebody gives right before handing you bad news, wrapped in fake politeness. "The HOA board approved use of your cabin for the Harvest Social." I honestly thought I misheard her. "My cabin?" "Yes," she said casually while flipping open the binder. "We needed a scenic venue for this year's event, and your property ranked highest among community preferences." I stared at her for a second, then at the paperwork inside the binder. Catering invoices, shuttle schedules, parking maps, portabilité rentals. This woman had planned an entire upscale event on my property without asking me once. I laughed under my breath, because sometimes your brain refuses to process something that ridiculous. "You're serious?" "Completely." Behind her, the wind moved through the pine trees, carrying that cold October smell: wet leaves, chimney smoke, rain somewhere in the distance. Meanwhile, Vanessa smelled like expensive perfume in hotel lobbies. I pointed toward the cabin behind me. "You mean the cabin I built with my dad before he passed away?" "Yes." "The one sitting on land my grandfather left me?" "Yes." "The one I pay taxes on every year?" She sighed like I was slowing down a business meeting. "Under the revised Community Integration Charter, scenic use properties fall under Shared Event Authority." I blinked twice. "That is not a real thing. It passed in last year's amendment vote." "No, it didn't," I said immediately. "You tried sneaking that amendment into the Christmas potluck meeting after half the neighborhood had already gone home and everybody else was drinking bourbon cider." Her expression tightened for half a second. Tiny shift, but enough. That's when I knew she absolutely understood what she was doing. See, Vanessa wasn't dumb, and honestly that made her dangerous. Dumb people create chaos loudly. Smart, entitled people move quietly while everybody's distracted. She closed the binder and crossed her arms. "Regardless, the board approved the event unanimously." "That's funny," I said, "because half your board can't agree on pizza toppings." Her eyes narrowed. "The event is happening Saturday at noon. Vendors are already booked. And if I say no," that fake smile disappeared completely. Her face went cold, flat, controlled. "I'd strongly advise against creating conflict with the community, Ethan." There it was. Not a request. A warning. I looked past her toward the valley below us. Cabins tucked between orange trees and winding roads. The kind of place people moved to because they were tired of noise and politics. Funny how power always finds a way into quiet places anyway. "You know what's crazy?" I said quietly. "What?" "You actually think this mountain belongs to you." She crossed her arms tighter. "The community deserves access to shared beauty." I laughed once. "Shared beauty?" "Vanessa, it's my porch." That irritated her, which honestly made my day a little better. "You won't even need to be present," she said. "We already have access information on file." My stomach tightened. "What access information?" Her face shifted just enough for me to catch it. "The emergency gate code registered with the HOA office." "Still here." "You copy my gate code?" "We maintain records for community safety." "No," I said slowly. "You maintain control because you like pretending this neighborhood is your kingdom." She snapped the binder shut hard enough to make me jump a little. "We'll arrive at noon Saturday. I suggest you cooperate." Then she turned and walked back to her SUV like the conversation was finished, like she had already won. I stood there listening to the sound of her tires disappear, down the gravel road while cold wind moved through the trees around me. And for a second, I almost let it go. Not because she was right, but because I was tired. Tired of HOA meetings turning into political theater. Tired of neighbors acting scared to disagree with her. Tired of watching decent people stay quiet, because keeping the peace felt easier than fighting. But then I looked at my cabin again and felt something shift in my chest. That place wasn't just wood and stone. My father helped build half of it before cancer took him. My daughter learned to fish in the creek behind it. My marriage ended quietly at that kitchen table because somehow it still felt safer than sitting in a lawyer's office. Every scar in my life existed somewhere inside those walls. And Vanessa Holloway thought she could turn it into a wine tasting for rich people wearing sweaters around their shoulders. Yeah, no chance in hell. The second her SUV disappeared down the mountain road, I got to work. First thing I did was change the gate code. Then I drove into town and bought the thickest chain and padlock Tractor Supply had in stock. After that, I called my friend Luis over at Ridgeway Towing and asked him a hypothetical question. How fast can you remove 20 luxury SUVs from private property? He laughed so hard I thought he was going to choke. Depends, he said. Are we talking normal rich or vacation home rich? Vacation home rich. Oh, he said, then I'm bringing 2 trucks. By Friday night, I had fresh batteries in the floodlights, motion cameras pointed at the driveway, coffee brewing inside the cabin, and a front row seat waiting beside the porch window. Honestly, I expected maybe 20 or 30 people. I underestimated Vanessa badly. Saturday morning started quiet, cold fog rolling through the trees while sunlight slowly pushed over the ridge. Around 11:30, I heard the first engine climbing the road, then another, then another. By noon, there was a line of luxury SUVs stretching halfway down the mountain like somebody was filming a reality show called Chardonnay in the wilderness. A shuttle bus rolled up with Harvest Social printed on the side in fancy gold letters. Catering vans followed behind it. People climbed out carrying wine bags and folding decorations, laughing and taking selfies like they were arriving at some exclusive mountain resort. I sat inside my cabin sipping coffee in a flannel shirt watching the whole parade through the window, and I remember thinking the exact same thing people think right before a train wreck happens. Oh, this is going to get ugly. Then the honking started. Vanessa's Mercedes sat at the front of the line, pressed right against my locked gate. Her vanity plate read VNH1, because of course it did. She leaned on the horn like she thought noise could magically unlock chains. Eventually she climbed out, flanked by 2 board members and some poor event planner holding a clipboard bigger than her torso. Vanessa marched straight to the gate, grabbed the chain, and froze. I could practically see the confusion hit her in real time. She turned toward the crowd and forced a smile. "Everybody just remain calm," she called out. "There's been a minor misunderstanding." That's when I stepped out onto the porch holding my coffee mug. "You mean the misunderstanding where you planned a party on private property without asking the owner?" Heads turned immediately. The whole crowd went quiet except for a generator humming near the catering van. Vanessa looked up at me, and I swear I could actually see steam rising out of her ears. "Ethan," she snapped, "this behavior is incredibly hostile." "Hostile?" I laughed. "Vanessa, you tried to break into my property with a shuttle bus full of strangers." One of the board members stepped closer to her and whispered something. She waved him off without even looking. The board approved this event under Article 9 of the Community Charter. "No," I said calmly. "Article 9 applies to common recreation spaces, not privately deeded land." A guy near the shuttle bus actually pulled out his phone and started looking it up. You could feel the mood shifting already. People weren't smiling anymore. They were confused, suspicious, a little embarrassed. Vanessa grabbed the bars of the gate hard, enough her rings scraped metal. "You're humiliating the community over one afternoon." "No," I said. "I'm protecting my property from a woman who thinks HOA dues make her queen of the mountain." A couple people behind her snorted, trying not to laugh. "Wrong move." Vanessa spun around, glaring at the crowd like a substitute teacher losing control of a classroom. Nobody is laughing right now. But they were. Quietly. Nervously. The event planner finally spoke up. Vanessa, she whispered, did you confirm ownership before booking this? Vanessa ignored her completely. Then she looked back at me and lowered her voice. Unlock the gate before you create a legal problem for yourself. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Instead, I held up my phone. Already spoke to the sheriff's department this morning. They're aware a group of unauthorized people are attempting access to private land. That changed everything. You could literally see people start backing toward their cars. The shuttle driver shut off the engine. One of the caterers quietly began loading trays back into the van. Vanessa looked around and realized for the first time the crowd was slipping away from her. So she played her last card. You'll regret embarrassing the board like this, she said through clenched teeth. We can issue fines. Bien, cease and desist orders. Go ahead, I said. My attorney would love to hear how HOA money got spent on a private event without proper approval. Her face changed instantly. Tiny little flicker. Fear. There it was. What are you talking about? She asked too quickly. I made some calls yesterday, I said casually. Funny thing about small towns. Vendors talk, especially when somebody prepays nearly 15 grand from a community account. The clipboard girl looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Everything was approved unanimously, Vanessa snapped. Interesting, I replied, because I had coffee with Dale and Ruth from the board yesterday, and apparently there hasn't been a formal vote in over 2 months. Now the murmuring started for real. A woman near the shuttle bus crossed her arms. Wait, our dues paid for this. Somebody else asked how much had been spent. Another guy muttered, I knew fees got higher for a reason. Vanessa's control over the crowd started cracking right in front of me, and she knew it. Then the sheriff's SUV came around the bend. Deputy Connor Hale stepped out slowly, adjusting his hat while looking over the scene like a man already tired of everybody involved. Vanessa immediately rushed toward him, talking fast. Officer, thank God. This resident is interfering with an officially sanctioned HOA function, and Connor held up one hand. Ma'am, are you the property owner? Well, technically under HOA authority, that's a no. He turned toward me. You Ethan Mercer? I nodded and handed him a folder containing the deed, property survey, and a statement from my attorney. Connor flipped through the pages for maybe 10 seconds before exhaling through his nose. Well, he said quietly, this is pretty straightforward. Vanessa stepped forward again. Officer, he's deliberately escalating this situation. Connor looked at her the way exhausted dads look at toddlers throwing tantrums in grocery stores. Ma'am, you organized a private event on land you do not own without written permission from the owner. The HOA charter allows— No, Connor interrupted calmly. It doesn't. That silence afterward felt incredible. Half the crowd looked furious. The other half looked deeply embarrassed they'd shown up at all. Somebody in the back actually started clapping. Then another person joined in. Within seconds, people were returning to their vehicles while Vanessa stood there frozen, watching her perfect little mountain social collapse in real time. The shuttle bus pulled away first. Then the caterers. Even the event planner abandoned her, mumbling something about breach of contract while climbing into a Prius and driving off without making eye contact. Connor waited until most of the cars were leaving before stepping closer to Vanessa. You need to clear the area now, he said. If not, we could discuss trespassing charges. She looked like she wanted to scream. Instead, she got into her Mercedes, slammed the door hard enough to shake the windows, and tore down the mountain road, spraying gravel everywhere. I stood there listening to the last engines disappear into the valley below while cold wind moved through the trees again. The mountain finally felt quiet, peaceful, like itself. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered carefully. You didn't hear this from me, the voice said immediately. It was Greg Barlow, one of the quieter HOA board members. But there's a paper trail on everything. Vanessa used community funds for the whole event. Shuttles, food, decorations, all of it. I leaned against the porch railing. You serious? Dead serious, he replied. And honestly, people are furious. You standing up to her today kind of cracked the dam open. I looked down the empty mountain road where the line of SUVs had been less than 20 minutes earlier. So what happens now? Greg was quiet for a second. Then he sighed. Now, people start asking questions Vanessa never expected to answer. 2 days later, the Cedar Hollow Community Center looked less like an HOA meeting and more like the beginning of a courtroom drama. Every folding chair was filled. People lined the walls holding coffee cups and whispering to each other while pretending not to stare at the empty seat where Vanessa usually sat like a queen on a throne. I walked in expecting tension. What I didn't expect was fear. Real fear. Because once people realize money might be missing, the mood changes fast. Greg Barlow stood at the front beside a long table stacked with folders. The guy looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since the gate incident. "Thanks for coming," he said into the microphone. "This emergency session concerns allegations of financial misconduct involving HOA funds and unauthorized use of private property." The room immediately went dead silent. Then he introduced the man standing beside him, Detective Mason Avery from the County Financial Crimes Unit. Big guy, gray hair, calm eyes. The kind of man who looked like he'd spent 20 years watching small-town corruption unravel one lie at a time. Avery stepped up slowly and opened a folder. "Over the last 48 hours, he said, we uncovered approximately $22,000 in undocumented expenditures from HOA accounts." You could actually hear people sucking air around the room. These expenses include transportation rentals, catering services, landscaping contracts, and unauthorized event planning connected to last Saturday's incident. A woman near the front stood up immediately. "You mean our dues paid for that party?" "Based on current evidence," Avery replied, "yes." Chaos almost broke loose right there. People started talking over each other. Somebody cursed loudly in the back. One older guy slammed his coffee onto the floor hard enough the lid popped off. Greg had to tap the microphone 3 times just to settle everyone down. Then Avery dropped the real bomb. "There's also evidence financial records were altered retroactively." Silence again. Heavy silence. "Meaning what exactly?" somebody asked. Avery looked down at his notes. "Meaning board votes appear to have been falsified after the fact." That hit the room like a punch to the chest. Because up until then, most people still wanted to believe Vanessa had just overstepped. Controlling? Sure. Arrogant? Definitely. But fraud? Forgery? That crossed into something darker. Greg finally looked over at me. Ethan submitted security footage, audio recordings, and witness statements from several board members confirming no formal approval vote ever occurred. Every head in the room turned toward me at once, and honestly, I hated it. I'm not a spotlight guy. Never have been. I like my cabin, my trees, my quiet little corner of the mountain. But sometimes life drags you into the middle of something, whether you want it or not. Detective Avery accepted the flash drive from my hand and nodded once. "This helps establish timeline and intent," he said. Then a woman in the back raised her hand slowly. "Where's Vanessa?" Greg exchanged a look with Avery before answering. She declined to attend. Somebody muttered, "Coward," loud enough half the room heard it. The meeting dissolved after that into angry conversations and legal discussions, but the strangest part happened outside afterward. I found Greg standing alone near the parking lot staring out toward the tree line. "You okay?" I asked. He laughed softly without humor. "You know what the crazy part is?" "What?" When Vanessa first ran for HOA president, she talked about transparency and preserving community values. I shook my head. Funny how people always use words like values right before doing something shady. Greg smiled tiredly. "You ever think about running for the board?" God, no. That made him laugh for real. 3 days later, things got even worse. I got a call from Assistant District Attorney Claire Donnelly asking if I'd testify if charges move forward. I said yes before she even finished the question. Then she told me something that made my stomach turn. "We uncovered additional invoices tied to environmental work near your west property line." "What kind of work?" I asked. "Landscaping, tree removal, slope modification." I went quiet instantly. That area borders protected conservation land. "Exactly," Claire said. And according to the paperwork, Vanessa approved the work personally. The second we hung up, I grabbed my jacket and drove my ATV out toward the western ridge. Sure enough, I found fresh tire tracks cutting through the edge of the conservation corridor. Small trees had been ripped out. Decorative shrubs sat planted in neat rows where native brush used to grow. Somebody had literally reshaped protected land to improve the view behind my cabin for that stupid event. I stood there staring at the damage while cold wind moved through the trees overhead, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I actually got angry. Not irritated, not sarcastic, angry. Because mountains like ours survive because people leave them alone. And Vanessa treated the whole place like scenery for her personal image. I took photos, tagged coordinates, and sent everything directly to the ADA's office. The next morning, county vehicles showed up outside Vanessa's house. She never answered the door. By evening, rumors were everywhere. By the end of the week, she was arrested outside her cousin's lake house 2 counties over. Local news ran footage of her being escorted into a cruiser wearing oversized sunglasses despite the rain, still trying to hold on to whatever dignity she thought remained. Turns out the investigation uncovered far more than fake HOA votes. Vanessa had been funneling grant money through fake beautification projects for nearly a year. State funds meant for trail restoration somehow ended up paying for custom stone patios and landscaping work on private property owned by her relatives. Once investigators started pulling financial records apart, the whole thing collapsed fast. Her cousin flipped first. Then one contractor cooperated for reduced charges. By the time the trial started, prosecutors had enough paperwork to bury her. I testified on day 4. Vanessa finally looked at me when I walked past the defense table, and honestly, she didn't look powerful anymore. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow. Like all the confidence that used to fill every room had drained out of her completely. Her attorney tried painting me as some bitter anti-HOA neighbor with a personal grudge. "Mr. Mercer," he asked, "isn't it true you've resisted community authority for years?" I shrugged. Depends what you call authority. A few people laughed quietly. Even the judge smiled for about half a second before catching herself. In the end, it didn't matter anyway. The documents spoke louder than anybody in that courtroom. Vanessa Holloway was found guilty on fraud, forgery, misuse of public funds, and conspiracy charges. She got 8 years with parole eligibility after 5. Her cousin got 3. One contractor lost his business license entirely. After the sentencing, Cedar Hollow changed. Not overnight, but slowly in the way real places do. HOA meetings became public streams online. Spending had to be approved openly. Community members actually started talking to each other again, instead of whispering behind closed doors. A month later, we held a volunteer cleanup near the conservation trails Vanessa damaged. Families came out. Teenagers painted trail markers. Old men hauled brush into trailers while arguing about football. Nobody cared about status or committees anymore. People just worked together because they finally remembered the mountain belonged to all of us equally, not just whoever shouted the loudest. Toward the end of the afternoon, an older guy carrying a rake stopped beside me and nodded toward my cabin up the ridge. "You're the one who shut her down, huh?" he asked. I looked out toward the trees for a second before answering. "Honestly," I said, "all I really did was lock a gate." The old man smiled. "Sometimes that's enough." And maybe he was right, because these days when I sit out on my porch at night, listening to wind move through the pines, things feel quieter again. Not perfect, probably never perfect. There's still people in town who think Vanessa got treated too harshly. Others think more folks should have gone down with her. Honestly, maybe they're both right. But sometimes I still think about that first moment she stood in my driveway acting like my home belonged to her. And I wonder what would have happened if I just stayed quiet like everybody else always did. Maybe the mountain would have stayed beautiful anyway. Or maybe people like Vanessa only stop when somebody finally says no. So let me ask you this. If somebody in your community crossed a line like that, would you fight back even if it meant turning your whole neighborhood against you? Or would you keep the peace and let it slide? Let me know down in the comments, because honestly, I still don't know where the line between protecting your home and starting a war really is.